Madison Carter's seat stolen by white passenger. Seconds later, flight gets grounded. "Excuse me, you're in my seat," Madison said firmly, holding out her first-class boarding pass. The white businessman didn't even look up from his phone. "No, little girl," he muttered, waving dismissively. "You must be confused. This is my seat." Gasps echoed across the cabin as Madison's eyes narrowed. What happened next would ground a flight before it ever left the runway, expose ugly prejudice at 30,000 left, and prove that sometimes the person you underestimate has more power than you could ever imagine. This 11-year-old girl was about to teach an entire airplane a lesson about respect, dignity, and the dangerous assumption that appearances tell you everything about someone's worth. Madison didn't budge. She remained planted in the aisle, her small frame becoming an immovable obstacle as more passengers tried to board behind her. She could feel their impatience building like pressure in a closed system, could hear the shuffling of feet and the clearing of throats that signaled annoyance. "Excuse me," someone muttered behind her. "Can you move?" But Madison kept her eyes on the man in her seat. "My father booked this seat for me," she said, speaking slowly and clearly so there could be no misunderstanding. "Jonathan Carter. You can check the reservation system." The man, whose name was Richard Thornton, though Madison didn't know that yet, let out an exaggerated sigh that seemed designed to broadcast his irritation to everyone within earshot. He uncrossed his legs, set down his champagne glass with deliberate care, and raised his hand high in the air like a student seeking attention in class. "Flight attendant," he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "We seem to have a situation here." Within seconds, a woman in a crisp navy blue uniform appeared, moving down the aisle with practiced efficiency. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun that seemed to pull her whole face taut. Her smile was professional, but already strained at the edges, the smile of someone who'd been on her feet for hours and didn't need any complications. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her eyes immediately settling on Madison with barely concealed suspicion. Her name tag read, "Jessica." Richard gestured toward Madison with the casual authority of someone used to pointing out problems for others to solve. "This child seems confused about her seat assignment. Could you help her find where she's actually supposed to be?" Jessica's smile tightened further as she turned her full attention to Madison. There was something in her eyes, not quite hostility, but not kindness either. It was the look of someone who'd already made up her mind about what was happening here. "Honey," Jessica said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Madison handed it over, watching carefully as Jessica glanced at it. But it was barely a glance. Her eyes skimmed across the information without really reading it, without really seeing it. She handed it back almost immediately. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Jessica asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. Sometimes, when adults book tickets for children, there can be mix-ups with the names or seat assignments. It happens all the time. "There's no mix-up," Madison said, working hard to keep her voice steady despite the way her heart was starting to pound. "My father, Jonathan Carter, booked this seat specifically for me. I'm traveling as an unaccompanied minor. You can verify it in your system." Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly, a micro-expression that spoke volumes. She exchanged a quick glance with Richard, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding, a mutual agreement about what they were seeing here. "Jonathan Carter?" Jessica repeated, her tone making it sound almost like a question, like she was giving Madison a chance to correct an obvious mistake. "Are you absolutely sure you have the right name, sweetie? No confusion about your father's name?" Madison's jaw tightened. She wasn't stupid. She'd been black in America for 11 years, which meant she'd learned to read between the lines, to understand what people really meant when they used certain tones or asked certain questions. She knew exactly what Jessica was implying. "Yes," Madison said, her voice cold now. I'm sure. Jessica made no move to check her tablet, which hung from a strap around her neck. She made no move to verify the passenger manifest or look up the reservation. Instead, she placed a hand on Madison's shoulder, gentle on the surface, but with an undercurrent of condescension that made Madison's skin crawl. Listen, sweetie, why don't we find you a nice seat in the main cabin? I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there with the other children and families. First class can be a bit overwhelming for young people who aren't used to it. The subtext was clear. You don't belong here. Around them, more passengers were paying attention now. A man in his 60s, seated across the aisle in 2C, leaned toward his wife and muttered, not quite quietly enough, "Kids these days, no sense of their place." A woman in expensive-looking pearls, seated in row 3, whispered to her companion loud enough for Madison to hear, "Probably doesn't even have a real ticket. I bet it's some kind of mistake." Another voice, from somewhere behind Madison, "This is why first class isn't what it used to be. They let anyone on now." Richard Thornton leaned back in his seat, Madison's seat, and gave a theatrical shrug as if to say, "See what I have to deal with?" His smile was smug, satisfied. "She's just a confused kid who got lost on her way to her real seat. Let's get her sorted out so the rest of us can take off on time. Some of us have important meetings to get to." Madison felt the walls closing in. Every face around her seemed to mirror the same message, the same assumption, the same prejudgment. It didn't matter that she had a boarding pass with her name on it. It didn't matter that she'd followed every rule, done everything right. What mattered to them, what they saw first before anything else, was a little black girl in a hoodie who couldn't possibly afford first class, who couldn't possibly belong in this space. But Madison wasn't leaving. She thought about her father, about his steady hand on her shoulder that morning. She thought about her grandmother's stories of lunch counter sit-ins, of refusing to give up seats on buses, of standing firm in the face of people who insisted you didn't belong. She wasn't leaving. Madison planted her feet more firmly and looked directly at Jessica, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I have the right to sit in this seat," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the trembling she felt in her legs. "This is the seat my father paid for. I'm not moving until someone actually verifies my reservation instead of just assuming I don't belong here." Jessica's professional smile vanished like smoke. Her voice, when she spoke again, had lost all pretense of sweetness. It was sharp now, edged with authority and barely suppressed irritation. "Young lady, you are holding up this entire flight. We have a schedule to keep, and dozens of other passengers who are waiting to take off. If you don't cooperate and move to your assigned seat, I will have no choice but to call airport security. Is that what you want?" Richard Thornton chimed in, swirling his champagne glass in a lazy circle that somehow managed to convey supreme confidence and utter dismissal at the same time. "I've been flying first class with this airline for 10 years. 10 years I have never, and I mean never, seen anything like this. Someone in this girl's family clearly doesn't know how to raise a child properly, doesn't understand basic respect and social awareness." A few passengers nodded in agreement. A heavy-set man in row 4, his face already red from what looked like several drinks, called out, "These kids today have no respect for authority, no respect at all. When I was her age—" "She needs to learn her place," another passenger interrupted. Madison's hands trembled at her sides, but she kept them there, refused to let anyone see how much their words were affecting her. She could feel the anger building inside her like a storm system, dark and powerful and potentially destructive. But she also knew, because her father had taught her, because her teachers had taught her, because history had taught her, that losing her temper would only prove what these people already believed about her. So instead, she reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her phone. Jessica's eyes narrowed immediately. "You cannot use your phone right now. We are preparing for departure. All electronic devices need to be in airplane mode or turned off completely." I need to call my father to confirm my reservation, Madison said, her voice unwavering despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. That is my right as a passenger. You're refusing to verify my ticket, so I need to have him verify it for you. Jessica reached for the phone, her hand moving quick and decisive. Give me that. But Madison pulled it back, holding it against her chest. Don't touch my property, she said, and there was steel in her voice now, something that made Jessica pause for just a moment. The tension in the cabin had gone from uncomfortable to electric. It crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Passengers were fully engaged now, their own travels forgotten in favor of this unexpected drama. Some were pulling out their own phones, holding them up to record. Others were whispering urgently to their seatmates, their faces showing a mixture of discomfort, curiosity, and, in a few cases, recognition of something deeply wrong happening here. A black woman in row 5 leaned toward her husband and whispered urgently, her voice carrying despite her attempt at discretion. They're really doing this to that baby. They're really treating her like this. Her husband put a hand on her arm, shook his head slightly. Don't get involved, the gesture said. It's not worth the trouble. Madison heard them. She heard all of it. Every whisper, every judgment, every assumption. Her fingers moved quickly across her phone screen, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had become difficult. She opened her voice recorder app, the one she used for school projects and interviews for the student newspaper. She hit record, then placed the phone on her lap, screen facing up. If they were going to treat her this way, she would have evidence. Her father had taught her that much. Document everything. Truth matters, but proof matters more. A teenager in row 3, a white kid with expensive headphones hanging around his neck, muttered under his breath, "This is seriously messed up." But he didn't say it loud enough for the flight attendants to hear. He didn't stand up. He just watched, like everyone else. Madison realized with a cold, crystalline clarity that she was alone in this. These people, most of them anyway, had already decided who she was and what she represented. They'd seen her skin color, her age, her clothes, and they'd made their judgments. Nothing she said or did would change their minds. But she could make them face what they were doing. She could make them say it out loud. She took a slow, deep breath, just like her father had taught her during their meditation sessions on Sunday mornings. Stay calm, she told herself. Dad taught you this. Stay calm, stay smart, and don't give them any ammunition to use against you. The phone on her lap continued to record, its screen glowing softly. Around her, the cabin felt like a pressure cooker, tension building and building with nowhere to go. And Madison stood her ground. The head flight attendant arrived like a storm system, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair cut military short, and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. His name tag read Thomas Reed, and everything about him, from his perfectly pressed uniform to the way he carried himself, suggested a man who had seen every possible situation an airplane could throw at him and had handled them all with ruthless efficiency. Jessica immediately stepped aside, deferring to his authority. She spoke quickly, her words carefully chosen to frame the situation in a particular light. This young lady is insisting she has a first-class seat assignment, but she's refusing to move to the appropriate cabin section. She's also refusing to follow crew instructions regarding electronic devices and is becoming increasingly confrontational. She's holding up our departure. Thomas looked down at Madison, his expression clinical, assessing. His eyes swept over her in the same way the others had, taking in her worn sneakers, her hoodie, her age, her race, and Madison could practically see him forming his conclusions before he even spoke to her. "Where are your parents, young lady?" His voice was deep, authoritative, leaving no room for anything but a direct answer. "I'm flying alone," Madison said, working to keep her voice steady. "My father arranged unaccompanied minor service through the airline. He booked me a first-class seat for this flight. Thomas's eyebrows rose in obvious, almost theatrical skepticism. An 11-year-old flying first class alone. He said it slowly, as if testing the words to see if they sounded as absurd to everyone else as they clearly did to him. That's highly unusual. In fact, in my 15 years with this airline, I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen that. Richard Thornton sensed an ally and leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of assumed authority. I've already explained to your staff that there's been some kind of mix-up. I checked my reservation 3 times. Seat 2A is assigned to me. I'm a Diamond Elite member with this airline, have been since 2015. I fly first class exclusively. I think it's pretty clear who should be prioritized in a situation like this. Thomas nodded slowly, his expression softening, but only toward Richard. Understanding passed between them, a shared recognition of who belonged and who didn't. Yes, Mr. Thornton. I recognize your name from our VIP passenger list. I apologize sincerely for this inconvenience. We'll have it sorted immediately. Madison held out her phone toward Thomas. The screen showed her father's contact information, his photo smiling up from the screen. A professional headshot where he wore a tailored suit and an expression of quiet confidence. I can call my father right now and he'll confirm everything. It'll take 30 seconds. Thomas shook his head, not even looking at the phone. That won't be necessary. We have procedures for handling situations like this, and they don't involve disturbing other passengers with phone calls during boarding. We'll get this sorted internally through proper channels. He placed a hand on the back of seat 2A, Madison's seat, his body language proprietorial, as if by touching it he was claiming it for Richard. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a particular quality that Madison recognized immediately. The patronizing gentleness that adults used when they were trying to manage a child they considered difficult or unreasonable. Here's what's going to happen, Thomas said, crouching down slightly so he was closer to Madison's eye level, as if that somehow made this better. We're going to find you a very nice seat, probably one of our best seats in the main cabin, that's more appropriate for a young person traveling alone. First class is really designed for business travelers and adult passengers who understand the etiquette and expectations of this premium service. It's not really suitable for unaccompanied minors. The words landed like individual slaps. Around Madison, passengers shifted in their seats. Some looked uncomfortable, their eyes sliding away when she tried to make eye contact. Others nodded in agreement, their expressions suggesting they thought Thomas was handling this exactly right. An elderly white woman in row 4 made a clicking sound with her tongue, shaking her head slowly. Such a shame, she murmured to her companion. No one teaches children proper behavior anymore. Madison felt the humiliation wash over her in waves, hot and cold at the same time, making her skin prickle and her throat tighten. But beneath the humiliation was something stronger, something that had been building since the moment Richard Thornton first looked at her like she was something unpleasant he'd found stuck to his shoe. It was resolve, hard and bright and unbreakable. She looked directly at Thomas Reed, meeting his eyes with an intensity that seemed to surprise him. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the tightness in her throat, despite the tears she refused to let fall. These procedures you keep talking about, she said clearly, making sure her phone was still recording every word, seem to only be applied to certain people. You haven't checked the passenger manifest. You haven't verified my ticket. You haven't contacted your unaccompanied minor coordinator. You've just assumed, based on looking at me, that I don't belong here. But do you know who you're actually dealing with right now? The question hung in the air like smoke. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, Thomas's confident expression flickered. Something uncertain passed across his face. But he recovered quickly, his jaw setting into a harder line. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, he said, his voice dropping to something colder, more final. I'm dealing with a child who needs to learn to follow instructions from airline personnel. Now you can either walk to your actual assigned seat, or we can have security escort you off this aircraft entirely. Those are your options. Choose one." Madison didn't move. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, could sense the phones still recording, could hear the whispers that had started up again like a swarm of insects. She thought about her grandmother, about the stories of sitting at lunch counters while people screamed at her, of walking to school between lines of police while white parents shouted obscenities, of refusing to give up her seat on a bus even when threatened with arrest. Her grandmother had survived all of that. Madison could survive this. She knew what was coming next, and she was ready. The confrontation had metastasized. What had started as a dispute between Madison and Richard Thornton, then expanded to include the flight crew, had now become a full-scale spectacle involving nearly everyone in the first-class cabin and many passengers in economy who were craning their necks to see what was causing the delay. Passengers were openly filming now, phones held high to get the best angle. The cabin buzzed with whispered conversations, with speculation and judgment and, in a few cases, dawning recognition that something deeply wrong was unfolding before their eyes. Madison took a breath, centering herself the way her father had taught her during their Sunday morning meditation sessions. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying through the cabin. "I am formally requesting to verify my seat assignment through the proper airline channels before being moved. That is my right as a ticketed passenger." Thomas Reed crossed his arms over his chest, his stance widening into something more aggressive. "This is my decision as the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. You are disrupting our operations, causing a delay, and refusing to comply with crew instructions. You need to comply right now." Richard Thornton raised his champagne glass in a mock toast, his smile wide and smug. "Finally," he announced to no one in particular, "someone who knows how to handle things properly. This is what leadership looks like." A few passengers chuckled. One man in row 6 actually applauded, just 2 or 3 slow claps that somehow managed to be more insulting than if he'd said anything. Madison's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now. "If you don't allow me to contact my father or verify my reservation through official channels, I will have to document this as a violation of my passenger rights and federal regulations regarding the treatment of unaccompanied minors." Thomas's expression darkened like a sky before a storm. "Are you threatening me? Because I can have you removed from this flight entirely. We do not tolerate threats against crew members." That's when the crowd truly began to turn. An older white man in a business suit called out, "She's being completely unreasonable. Where are this child's parents?" A woman in designer sunglasses added, "I've been flying first class for 20 years and I have never seen a child up here alone. Something is definitely not right." "Probably a fake ticket," someone else suggested. Jessica leaned toward Thomas and said, just loud enough for Madison to hear, "We could check the security footage from check-in. See exactly how she got through the gate." Thomas nodded. "Good thinking. Let's verify through official channels how this young lady made it all the way to first class in the first place." Madison felt the trap closing around her. They were stalling, drawing this out, making it as humiliating and public as possible. They wanted her to break, to cry, to give up and accept whatever second-class treatment they decided to give her. But Madison didn't break. Instead, she lifted her phone, the one she'd kept recording this entire time, and spoke into it clearly and deliberately. She made sure her voice carried, made sure every word was captured not just by her device, but by the dozens of other phones now pointed in her direction. "My name is Madison Carter. My father is Jonathan Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Enterprises. I am requesting immediate verification of my ticket and my passenger rights before this situation escalates any further into a violation of federal aviation regulations." Thomas let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Carter Global Enterprises? Can't say I've ever heard of it." Richard Thornton grinned. "Probably some mom-and-pop operation. Maybe a small cleaning company or something." He looked around the cabin, playing to his audience. Several passengers laughed, but Madison didn't react. She didn't argue or defend or explain. She simply pressed the call button on her phone, the one labeled Dad, with his smiling photo next to it. The dial tone echoed through the cabin. In the sudden relative quiet, it seemed impossibly loud. The phone rang once. Passengers leaned forward slightly, curiosity overcoming their certainty. It rang twice. Thomas's expression remained skeptical, but something in his posture suggested he was starting to wonder. It rang a third time. Then a deep, warm voice answered, clear enough that several nearby passengers could hear it. "Madison? Baby girl, is everything okay?" The cabin went very, very still. Madison's voice carried relief she couldn't hide. "Dad, they're saying my seat isn't valid. They're trying to remove me." A pause, heavy, dangerous. When Jonathan Carter spoke again, his voice was arctic. "What flight? Who's handling this?" "AA2E847 to Denver. Thomas Reed and Jessica Martinez." "Put Thomas on! Now!" Thomas took the phone, patronizing smile in place. "Yes, this is Thomas Reed. And you are?" "Jonathan Carter, CEO of Carter Global Enterprises. I own 28% of shares in this airline and sit on the board. Now you have a problem with my daughter?" Thomas's face drained of color. His hand trembled. Jessica went pale. Richard's smile froze. Passengers frantically Googled. "I need Captain Andrews immediately," Jonathan continued, glacial. "This flight doesn't depart until resolved. Airport security will verify who's in seat 2A, purchased for my daughter through your unaccompanied minor program. I want full names and employee numbers. I'll review footage and records. If my daughter's been subjected to discriminatory treatment, this airline faces legal consequences that make national headlines. Clear?" Yes, sir." Within 90 seconds, the cockpit door opened. Captain Andrews emerged, tense. "Mr. Reed, what's happening?" Thomas handed him the phone. The captain listened, expression shifting to alarm. He checked his tablet. "Madison Carter, seat 2A, purchased by Jonathan Carter, Carter Global." His eyes closed briefly. When they opened, his look could melt steel. "Why?" Thomas had no answer. The captain spoke into the phone. "Mr. Carter, Captain Andrews, I cannot apologize enough. Handling immediately." He ended the call and picked up the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, brief delay. Airport security boarding momentarily." Whispers erupted. Passengers looked nervous. Some deleted videos. Madison stood beside her seat, face calm, heart pounding. She'd won. But the victory tasted hollow. Richard sat frozen, confidence evaporated. And Madison waited for justice. 2 airport security officers boarded, uniforms crisp, expressions neutral but alert. Behind them came someone in a dark suit, airport management based on the badge. Captain Andrews met them, speaking in low tones. He gestured toward Richard, then Madison, laying out the situation with economical precision. One officer, a black woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, approached Richard. "Sir, we need to verify your boarding pass and identification." Richard fumbled for his phone, hands shaking. He pulled up his boarding pass, tried to smile. It came out as a grimace. The officer scanned it, then checked his ID. "Sir, this shows seat 24C, economy class." The cabin went absolutely silent. Richard's face flushed deep red. "There must be some mistake. I'm Diamond Elite. I've been flying with this airline for years. I thought this seat was empty, so I assumed—" "You assumed you could take a seat not assigned to you," the officer finished, "without authorization. And when this young lady showed up with her legitimate boarding pass, you lied and claimed the seat was yours." Richard looked around for allies. The passengers who'd supported him earlier now looked away. "Sir, you need to come with us. We're filing a report for fraudulent seat occupancy and violation of federal aviation regulations. Given the recorded statements, there may be additional charges related to harassment and discriminatory conduct." "Charges? Richard's voice cracked. "I'm a loyal customer." The airport manager, a black woman in her 50s, stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, based on recorded evidence, you're being detained. The airline will pursue legal action for fraud, theft of services, and code of conduct violations. You're permanently banned. Depending on investigation outcome, you may face federal charges, up to 12 months imprisonment and fines up to $10,000. Richard went white. "You can't. I have meetings in Denver, important meetings." "You should have thought about that before you stole a seat and lied when caught." As they escorted Richard down the aisle, every passenger watched. Several still recorded. Richard kept his eyes down, shoulders hunched, all arrogance stripped away. When they reached the exit, the female officer caught Madison's eye and gave a small nod. Solidarity, recognition, respect. Madison nodded back. Captain Andrews turned to Thomas and Jessica. "You're both suspended, effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the aircraft. Your IDs will be confiscated. You'll receive official notification within 24 hours. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "But we didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't check. You made assumptions based on bias. You failed to verify the manifest. You ignored protocol for unaccompanied minors. You threatened to remove a legitimately ticketed passenger. Publicly, with recordings." He turned to Thomas. "You, as senior attendant, bear additional responsibility. You escalated instead of de-escalating. You made no effort to verify information. You relied on assumptions rather than facts." Thomas simply nodded and walked toward the exit, shoulders slumped. Jessica followed, crying quietly. Captain Andrews picked up the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of this airline, I want to personally apologize to Ms. Madison Carter for the completely unacceptable treatment she received today. Employees involved have been removed. We'll conduct a comprehensive review. This behavior does not represent our values. We failed today, and I am deeply sorry." After he finished, silence held for a moment. Then the black woman from row 5 slowly began to clap. Her husband joined, then the teenager, then others. The applause spread, tentative at first, then stronger. It wasn't universal. Some passengers still looked uncomfortable, but it was something. Madison finally sat down in seat 2A, her seat, where she'd belonged all along. She fastened her seatbelt with still shaking hands. She'd won. But as the applause faded, she found herself thinking not about victory, but about the fact that she'd had to fight it all. When the flight landed in Denver, Madison was exhausted, not from the flight, but from what had happened. Her grandmother waited at the gate, and Madison ran into a fierce hug that smelled like lavender and home. That night, Madison posted the audio recording. "Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong somewhere. Know your worth. Know your rights. Stand your ground." Within hours, hundreds of views. By morning, thousands. By afternoon, millions. The hashtag #KnowYourWorth trended. Thousands shared their own stories. 3 days later, Jonathan Carter held a press conference. Madison stood beside him. "What happened to Madison shouldn't happen to anyone," he said. "We cannot accept bias in any industry. This airline has committed to mandatory anti-discrimination training and revising protocols. But this is about how we treat each other." He looked at Madison. "My daughter taught me that dignity doesn't come from age or power. It comes from standing firm against injustice, from knowing your worth when everyone tells you you're worthless." A reporter asked how Madison stayed calm. "My dad told me people will try to make you small because it makes them feel big. But you don't have to shrink. I knew I was right. I knew if I stayed calm and stuck to truth, truth would win. But I was scared the whole time. I just didn't let them see it." Linda Washington, the woman from row 5, a civil rights attorney, offered pro bono representation. "That baby stood up when no one else would. I want to make sure her voice is heard." The airline settled, issuing a public apology, and establishing the Madison Carter Scholarship Fund for underrepresented youth pursuing aviation careers. "That feeling doesn't go away," her grandmother said one evening. "That knowledge you had to fight for something that should have been freely given, but you choose what you do with it. Use it to build bridges." "I want to build bridges," Madison said, "but I also want to make sure no one else fights this same fight." Her grandmother squeezed her hand. "That's my revolutionary girl." Madison became the face of the Know Your Worth movement overnight. Schools across the country invited her to speak. Her father was protective. She was still 11, still processing, still a child. But Madison wanted to do it. The first engagement was at an Atlanta middle school. She stood before an auditorium of mostly black and brown faces, young people who understood what she'd been through because they'd lived their own versions. "I'm not a public speaker," she started. Some kids laughed, helping her relax. "I'm just a kid who wanted to sit in the seat her dad paid for, but I guess that was too much to ask." She told the story, watching their faces shift through recognition, anger, satisfaction at the resolution. "Here's what I learned," she said. "Real power isn't about money or status or important parents. My dad being on that board shouldn't have mattered. I should have been treated with respect because I'm a human being with a valid ticket who'd done nothing wrong. Real power is courage to stand up when the world tries to push you down. It's refusing to be made small. It's knowing your worth when everyone treats you like you're worthless." A girl in front raised her hand. "But what if you're scared?" "Then you're scared," Madison said simply. "I was terrified. My hands shook. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear. But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway." After, students lined up to share stories. Madison listened to each one, and with each story, her resolve strengthened. This was never just about one airplane seat. Teachers took notice. Programs teaching students their rights sprouted up. Parents used the video as a conversation starter about dignity, standing up for yourself, the reality of bias in everyday interactions. The airline didn't just apologize, they acted. Zero tolerance for discrimination, independent review board, mandatory annual bias training, clear protocols for profiling complaints. The scholarship fund awarded its first grants within 6 months. 10 young people of color received pilot training funding. 15 got aviation management scholarships. 5 received maintenance certifications. One recipient, a young black woman from rural Mississippi who'd dreamed of being a pilot since 5, wrote Madison a letter that made her cry. "You showed me I belong in the sky. You showed me no one gets to tell me I'm not good enough. You stood your ground and changed my life." Madison kept that letter on her desk. On hard days when online comments got harsh or people criticized her for making a big deal of nothing, she'd read it and remember why this mattered. If you or someone you know has experienced something like this, share your story. Silence allows these situations to continue. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. Your dignity is not negotiable. If you witness injustice, if you see someone profiled, dismissed, discriminated against, speak up. Don't be the person who wants to help but doesn't know how. Be the person who acts. Record. Offer to witness. Stand with the targeted person. Every voice matters. Every act of solidarity makes a difference. And if you're young, a person of color, if you've been told you don't belong somewhere, know this: you belong everywhere you choose to be. Your worth is inherent, not granted by others. Your dignity is yours to claim and keep. Change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we refuse to accept the unacceptable. When we stand our ground, when we know our worth and demand others recognize it too. Madison's story reminds us that respect isn't earned. It's deserved by everyone. Doesn't matter your age, appearance, origin, or parents. Everyone deserves basic human dignity. The world will try to tell you otherwise. People will judge you based on appearance, age, race, accent, clothes. They'll try to make you small because it makes them feel big. But you don't have to shrink for anyone. Privilege isn't a birthright. But dignity? That's something no one can take from you unless you let them. Know your worth. Stand your ground. Document everything. Use your voice. Support others fighting similar battles. And never let anyone tell you where you don't belong, because you belong everywhere you have the right to be. And that's everywhere.